Aloha and welcome to Is This For Real? I'm Gregory Dunn, President and CEO of Hawaii's Better Business Bureau. Today I'm very fortunate to have with me a very good friend and also a wonderful resource for the community, Wendy Burkholder, the Executive Director of Consumer Credit Counseling Services of Hawaii. Wendy's going to join us today and talk a little bit about some of the things that happen to folks and ways that people can learn to protect themselves when faced with scams and challenges and being faced with mounting debts. So Wendy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I know folks are always thinking about credit counseling. For you, I mean, in your background, what drew you to get involved in the field of credit counseling?
Well, I started with the agency a long time ago, 26 years ago, and I was very drawn to the clients. I was very drawn to their situations and their stories, and it made a very big difference to me to know that I could actually do something to help them. And so it led to a long career with CCCS of Hawaii.
That's really fantastic. Now, Credit Counseling Services of Hawaii is a 501c3 nonprofit, correct?
It is a nonprofit corporation.
How does that differ from other credit counseling services that people see out there or may be enticed to deal with?
Well, I think that, first of all, Hawaii state law requires that you be a nonprofit in order to provide credit counseling in the state.
Really?
So that certainly is one thing to be looking for. I think that you want to be careful of anybody who is offering you services online. There are a lot of predators out there, especially when you're in situations where you might be searching for answers to resolve your debt problems online. That can lead to all kinds of troubles.
Yeah, I know that we were talking a little bit earlier about how when a lot of people do research online and they may not understand that there are certain ways that different companies track your behavior, your searches online, and that information is collected, and then people all of a sudden, can you explain a little bit more about what happens when someone is out looking for something like that?
Well, people very often trigger innocently an avalanche of purported services that are there to help them get out of debt. And they do that by searching loan consolidation or debt consolidation, those kinds of terms. Once you've put that out there, you've left a footprint. And there are a lot of less than legitimate businesses that troll the internet for that kind of information. And if you've ever noticed, you might search for something and then it just seems miraculous that for the next 2 weeks you're bombarded with information about whatever it was you were searching for. The same thing happens with debt consolidation. And the risk of harm to a family or an individual can be great when you're talking about your whole financial life. Well,
and I mean, that's particularly difficult here in Hawaii, where a lot of folks have a difficult time making it. You know, you're working 2 or 3 jobs, you're barely getting by. The house or the cost of housing is so great, and gasoline, all the expenses that it takes to just get by. Folks find themselves in a position where they're reaching out and looking for help. In terms of the service that you provide as a nonprofit to the community, maybe you could explain a little bit about the difference between a nonprofit service provider and a for-profit service provider, people that say, we'll do this for X amount of fee or X amount of dollars up front.
Well, I think that you need to be aware that anybody asking you for an upfront fee, that is a red flag. When we do group educational workshops, one of the things that we try to forewarn people or things that we tell them to look for is, first of all, are they approaching you? Are they initiating contact with you?
So like in other words, telephone or
right. In other words, were you online? Were you Googling debts? Were you talking about debt restructuring? Were you worried about credit? So that initiates action from them calling you or contacting you online. That is usually a red flag. Because as a nonprofit, most nonprofits have very limited resources. Right. And we certainly don't have the the resources necessary to go out and find folks. We have to hope that they find us. Another thing that we get concerned about is that when you Google credit counseling, if you Google our organization, you will be astounded at what comes up.
I did it yesterday. It was really astounding to me, the number of paid ads for consumer credit counseling that come up in the very top sections of a Google search or of a online informational search, and also along the side. That's not you folks.
That's not us,
Okay.
because we don't have that kind of advertising money in our budget. And you have to question, if someone has the ability to pay top dollar for being at the top of the list on the Google ad list, running all kinds of television commercials. We understand that our clients are up in the middle of the night worried about how they're going to make ends meet, how they're going to make rent, and they are bombarded with infomercials of all of these wonderful, resources out there that can save them from their debts and cut their debts in half, and all that in itself should set off alarm bells, because that is a lot of money to advertise, to have a budget that size, even if they are purporting or representing themselves to be nonprofit. That makes me wonder, well, then where did all that money come from to conduct all this advertising?
Yeah, one of the big things that we always tell people at the Better Business Bureau is that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so it sounds like that's also the case when people are looking at consumer credit counseling.
I think coming off the recession and having been doing this as long as I have been doing this, there were so many people that were negatively impacted by the economic downturn. And they are now recovering. People are back to work. They're finding jobs, and life is sort of getting back to normal for most, but they do have this sort of wake of disaster behind them of debts that they weren't able to manage.
And that could go back several years, right?
It could go back 2007, 2008. A lot of people were separated from jobs in 2009, 2010.
A lot of friends that happened to, absolutely.
Right. So now they're working on recovery, and that leads them to search for options. So yes, life in Hawaii is very expensive. It is hard to get by, and even more so if you sort of had the pins knocked out from under you during the recession. Now you're getting back on your feet. How do you resolve that? We're seeing a lot of those folks right now.
Now, let's say that someone did have that situation where they had trouble back several years. Generally speaking, under the Fair Debt Collection Act, how long or how far back can consumers feel that they're responsible for debts that they had accumulated?
Well, generally speaking, debts are collectible for 6 years.
Okay.
So, and as we were speaking earlier about this, you folks and my agency are getting a lot of calls from people who are hearing from collectors out of the blue for debts that are very old. Often people don't even remember them.
They don't remember it, or they don't even remember the name of the collector or the agency or the name of the company that's saying that they owe that debt to that collector.
Right. And it's not unusual for collection agencies to buy paper from each other.
So basically they buy the debt. So like company A will buy the debt from company B.
Right. But the first thing, if you get a call from a collection agency, there is absolutely no reason to panic. And you definitely want to know who you're dealing with, have it in writing, is it in fact your debt, and you want to know what your rights are. And the law you were referring to is called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. And it's basically a consumer's bill of rights on the do's and don'ts of what collection agencies can and cannot do.
And where could the everyday person find a copy of that to understand? Is it they could contact your office, or is it on your website for them to access?
You can just pretty much Google the
Google
Fair Debt
it?
Collection
Okay.
Practices
Okay.
Act. Collection agencies are also regulated by the state, the RICO office. So if you're suspect about someone calling you, if they're acting in a manner that you find threatening or inappropriate.
Because a debt collector, they can't threaten you. They can't put you in jail. They can't take away, what, I mean, there's some standards they have to abide by in communicating with you, is what I understand.
There absolutely are standards, and it is not acceptable to be threatened with going to jail. They cannot threaten to sue you if in fact that is not in the plan to do. They can't talk to other people about your debt. That's something we hear often, that people call panicking saying, this collector called and he's going to talk to my boss. Well, that is not okay under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. So collection agencies generally are fairly accountable for their behavior, but their job is to provoke action on the part of the consumer, and often they can do that by being intimidating. And it's important that people be armed with information about what can and can't happen.
It's important for us to be able to educate the public more about this, because one of the things that we hear the most is that in both situations where you have someone that has debts from the past and they're being aggressively pursued by a collector, the same type of behavior is exhibited by scammers when they're reaching out and trying to intimidate a family or an elderly person that to pay this debt. You owe this.
Right.
You need to do this, or I'm going to throw you in jail, or we're going to sue you, or we're going to take everything and we're going to ruin your credit report. So anytime someone calls the Better Business Bureau and asks about that, one of the things that we tell them is, hang up the phone. If you can't get it in writing, hang up the phone. You don't need to talk to them. In the case of it being a valid debt, however, it's important for the consumers to know certain things about the dates and the times of when that debt was incurred. That's under the Act. How far does that go back? 6 years, you said?
Generally, they have the right to pursue the debt for 6 years from the date of last activity.
The last activity.
Right.
So that's really important.
And date of last activity is usually the last payment
Okay.
they received. So we often see people that are baited into making what collectors often refer to as, just give me a sign of good faith and send us $5. Well, you might be resetting that clock if you do that.
So if I have a debt that's 10 years old, that someone calls me out of the blue and says, you owe us $10,000 because of this bad debt, we want you to send us $20. So under that, if I sent them that $10, it would reset that clock on the 6 years.
It certainly has the ability to do that. Wow. Yes.
That's very frightening.
And that's why it's important to get that written notice. We understand the urgency that collectors place upon people to act. We deal with those phone calls every day. People shocked and ashamed and afraid, and we tell them, if the debt is 6 or 8 or 10 years old or longer or 2 years old, the first place to start is with that written notice, because you never should send money out into the blue, either by mail or wiring or electronic funds transfer, without having a starting point of, who are you? What do I owe you? What was this debt originally for? Because once you get that written notice, you have a timeline that you can ask them to validate the debt. And if you just go ahead and make that payment, you've complicated your position unnecessarily.
Right, certainly, because once that money leaves your hands, it's out of your control. You've potentially reset the clock, and if it wasn't a valid debt, let's say that it's a scam. I know that we were talking earlier about the recent scam that is being promulgated in Honolulu right now, that we're seeing these invoices that are being sent to small business owners for Yellow Pages ads. that are fraudulent. They're false. The customer never signed up for the ad, but yet they're getting an invoice and being threatened with collection action. And so the warning is, if you get something like that, don't just immediately send the payment out.
Absolutely not. And you should check with the Better Business Bureau to see if there's any record of history there. And you should also check with the RICO office because, again, the state oversees collection agencies, and they have to be licensed to collect in this state. And if they aren't licensed, RICO's definitely interested in who are you and why are you trying to collect from our consumers, because you need to be registered and we need to validate that you are a legitimate corporation.
So now RICO is the Regulated Industries Complaint Office.
Correct.
So, and that's part of the state of Hawaii government. And so they help manage consumer issues in those regulated industries.
Correct.
Now, in your experience in the years that you've worked in consumer credit counseling, I mean, there's got to be some real heartbreaking stories of things that people have either fallen for, fallen victim to a scam and wound up being nearly bankrupt, or does anything stick out in your mind of a particular situation that it would be another red flag for folks to look out for and always ask, is this for real before they jump into it?
I think anybody guaranteeing you favorable outcomes, whatever that is, we've seen it during the foreclosure crises. There were a lot of folks or firms and businesses that were guaranteeing people that if you pay us, we will help you and you will not lose your home to foreclosure. Again, the upfront fee, any kind of upfront fee, should set off alarm.
Okay.
Should set off alarms. Any kind of pressure. I had a client not too long ago that she was convinced by somebody that had called her that they were going to show up with a check. She just had to send them.
She won a sweepstakes or something.
It wasn't a sweepstakes, but it was some sort of if in sort of investment. If you send us $500, we're going to show up, in a month from now with $100,000 check in your name. And she, as most people in Hawaii are, we are very open, we're very trusting. And she bought the story, and she cleaned out her bank account.
And that was about how much? Would you guess? Thousands?
It was substantial.
Substantial. Yeah.
It was substantial, but then to take it further, they kept baiting her. Yes, we did get that money, but we just need a little bit more. And then she maxed out all of her credit cards in an effort to keep sending them money, because they had her so completely convinced that at some point they were going to show up at the airport with that check. And things got to the point where she was now borrowing from her children.
Oh my goodness.
And that was really the only way this sort of blew open, was she was still completely convinced. But her kids finally said, why aren't you okay? Why are we having to loan you money to make it to your next paycheck? What's going on? And that's when the whole thing sort of came to light.
Yeah.
So the adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably...
One of the things that we see a lot in scam artists in particular, once you send them that first payment, they know that they have you on the hook.
Right.
They've got a live one, and they're going to keep taking and stringing you along. And you'll find the amounts go up until you won't give as much, and then it'll come back down. And as long as they can keep getting the money, they'll keep coming back.
Yeah.
But in this particular instance, so that individual then, I'm sure they were nearly destitute by that time. Did they own their house? Was it something that they were at risk of losing their home? Or?
Well, if you can't make your mortgage payments, you're at risk of losing your home. And she had finally devolved to that state. We again, during the height of the recession, and when so many folks were in foreclosure, they were dealing with people who were saying, don't send the money to your lender. You send it to us instead. And we're going to work with your lender. And those were particularly heartbreaking because the the consequences were catastrophic. In some cases, people did lose their home.
Yeah, because they believed someone else, and so they were sending the money off without knowing who they were really dealing with.
Well, and I think desperate people do desperate things. So if you are deeply in debt, and that is keeping you awake at night or causing friction at home, if you are behind on a mortgage, it sets you up for you trying to remain in hope and grasping at things that it never fails. In counseling families, in counseling individuals, when you tell them, did you notice this, were you concerned, did this make you uneasy when they wanted money up front? Did it not bother you that they were calling you 2 and 3 and 4 times a day trying to get you to sign those papers? In retrospect, people will go, yeah, that really, now that I think about it, but at the time, they are in that moment of, this is going to help me save my credit, or this is going to stop the foreclosure from going through, and so they bite the bait.
They bite it. So in terms of people's vulnerability, I mean, we went through a bad time, things are getting a little bit better. Do you see there any difference in people falling prey to these kind of activities, whether it's a good economy or a bad economy?
Unfortunately, the predators thrive whether it's a good economy or a bad economy. But I think in rougher waters, I think they're more lively when the waters get rough. I think the thing that concerns me most right now is the recession was brutal to families that had mortgages they could afford, had savings, little debt, and then through a series of events, usually unemployment, were unstable for a long period of time. And so they have this debt that they're left with to deal with. And now that they're recovering, I think that credit again is flowing, and there may be options available to them now that weren't available 2 and 3 years ago. But I think it's still really tough to access credit if your history isn't the best, and that makes that particular segment very vulnerable to these predatory scams.
Yeah, we see that a lot with consumers that are looking for, and you hear it on the radio or TV a lot, where get what you deserve, get that vehicle you deserve, or get this item that you deserve, and we'll help you do it. Not understanding the true ramifications of the contract that they're about to sign, or that they're going to be asked to sign, or even reaching out and giving that personal information to someone that isn't really a lender.
Right.
Those kind of situations we see happen quite a bit. Now, in terms of the services that your agency provides, what's the scope of the services that you provide? Is it just for those that are facing bankruptcy, or what's an ideal point for someone to call your office or stop in and ask for assistance?
We would really love to see people before they're considering bankruptcy, really love to see them before that. I think that anytime you are not comfortable with where you are at financially, if you are at or near your credit limits, if you are getting collection calls, if you are not making it from one pay to the next without tapping some form of credit, that's the time to seek help. Unfortunately, that's not human nature, and there's a lot of shame attached to...
Yeah, it's very difficult in Hawaii. We have a culture that, it's a small community, we all know each other, and there is that aspect of being ashamed of the situation that you found yourself in, and it's difficult to let people know it's okay to pick up the phone and ask for help, especially from a nonprofit organization.
We invariably hear from clients that, wow, I wish I'd seen you a year ago. I would have done things different. I would have made different decisions. That is the gift that our work does for people, or gives to people. And it's this empowerment that comes with self-knowledge and understanding. When people make contact with us, we understand that they're fearful and they're embarrassed, So they don't face any judgment with us. We've counseled thousands of people in our 46-year history. So we try to reduce that sense of shame, because if you do nothing and you just allow situations to further disintegrate, you're just setting yourself up for terrible consequences. And there's so much power that comes with understanding your financial landscape.
It's taking control of it.
Taking control of it, understanding what your rights are under laws like the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, understanding what your responsibilities are as a borrower. There's power in that knowledge. And once people fully grasp the entire picture, they're astounding at how well they can do from that point on. But when you're
it's
getting
a relief, because
it
then
is
it's
a
like,
relief.
you know,
it is a
the
relief.
monkey's off your back. You have a plan. You understand what you're doing. So.
And now you're not afraid to answer the phone
Then
or open your mail.
Or open your mail.
Right.
That's a great place to be.
Right.
So, any last tips before we close out on our conversation today for folks that have received a call or a notice or something? Should they ignore it? Should they not? What are just a couple of small tips that people should walk away from with?
I wouldn't ignore anyone that's threatening to impact the state of your credit. That's not something you want to ignore. But I think you want to verify the source of information. Okay. And I think that you want to be certain that you're dealing with a legitimate organization. And there's numerous ways to do that. And if you don't know how, ask. That's why we exist. It's why the Better Business Bureau exists. We're here as resources to make sure that people aren't led astray. That's really wonderful. And Wendy, I just can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule. I know you just flew in today, and things are really moving fast for you. But again, thank you for taking the time to share with our community what they need to know about debt and about how it can affect their lives. My pleasure. Certainly, we encourage folks to call Consumer Credit Counseling Services of Hawaii, available online or on the telephone at any time. And so, certainly, if you're ever concerned or wonder about if the person you're talking to is for real, are they really for real, you can reach Hawaii's Better Business Bureau either online or on the telephone. You can email us, and we also have live chat on our website where our representatives here locally in Hawaii will be happy to help you figure out if this is for real.